Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
For many of the people who come from Mexico, you know that Mexico is just filled with ghost stories and myths. For all of you who don't know, well, now you know. There are many stories and myths told in the town where my parents are from. I have heard about many of them through my parents, who have heard these stories from the older women who used to sit around together outside of their houses in the evening telling these supposed ghost stories. One that I heard in particular from my grandmother really caught my interest. This did not happen to me, mind you, but I would really appreciate some comments and feedback on this. My grandma said that when she was little, her mother used to tell her about these tiny little people as in Thumbelina, the kind of people that were supposedly mischievous and would always steal small personal objects in your house if you weren't careful. Now, she said they weren't harmful at all, but that they always came when you weren't looking. She blamed the loss of many objects on these little people. My grandmother, of course, wasn't one to easily believe in such things, until one day later on in her life, she said she happened to come across one. She said she was just sitting in her house one day. For those of you not familiar with a Mexican house, usually the house has a type of court or patio right in the middle where it is open, so there is sun and the sky coming in, and she had her eyes closed, just relaxing, when she felt a tug on her pants on one of her legs. She ignored it and kept her eyes closed. Again, she felt a tug on her pants and she thought it was like a cat or something, and when she opened her eyes, her shoe on one of her feet was gone. Later that day, she found the shoe down where the animals were, by this big door leading to a big yard and the town river. Well, this happened again the next day, and she said she was determined to catch that cat. Only this time, after the second tug, she opened her eyes and said, "I got you." And to her surprise, it was a tiny little man, almost like a fairy, only without any wings or anything. He was running with her shoe. But then he dropped it. She would also tell me that sometimes when they would eat or have dinner, they would sometimes leave tortillas on the table in a cloth, and later they wouldn't be there anymore. One time, one of my aunts saw one and ran out of the house across the street to the neighbor's house. Now, this isn't my story, but for some reason I feel that there are all types of different things we don't understand and cannot explain. I was wondering if anyone could give me any information on what these little people could be, or if they even exist. The two people, my grandma and my aunt, had these experiences at different times. My grandma, having hers first, had not told anyone about it until my aunt told her story. Could it be that they both saw the same thing?
Growing up, I always liked anyone else who had older siblings and have had them tell me stories to scare me. Now, on this particular story, it wouldn't have been so bad if it were just my oldest brother telling me the story, but I remember my mother telling me as well. Let me start off by saying I come from a big family. There are 6 of us kids that my mom had, 4 older boys, I and my younger brother. The story begins in a little house we all lived in, except my younger brother on account he wasn't born yet. There were 3 bedrooms in the home. The first bedroom my 2 oldest brothers shared, second one my 2 younger of the 4 brothers shared, and then there was me who slept in my mom's room in a cradle. According to my oldest brother, one night before going to bed, all of them were being rowdy and decided they all wanted to sleep in the same room to see who could stay up the longest, so they went ahead and asked for my mom's permission to sleep all together in one room. My mom said it was okay on one condition, that they all not be so loud because I was asleep and tried to at least go to bed at a decent hour. They agreed and went to the room. At one point, the boys began to get loud and rowdy again, and my mom was forced to go in and give a warning to them. As she turned away, she saw my oldest brother stick out his tongue at her, and she quickly turned back and told him that it wasn't nice to do that and that God didn't like little boys being so hateful, and that if he continued to do that, the devil would snatch his tongue. Now, keep in mind, my mother, who at that time was a profound Catholic, and not to mention Hispanic, and well, God and the devil played big roles in her life. My brother, not liking that comment she made in return, said,
"Well, if that's true, then I'll be seeing him soon."
My mom scorned him and turned and walked out the room. As the night progressed, my brother said he was the last to fall asleep, and as he was drifting off, he felt someone grab the blankets and pull them off him abruptly. He, thinking it was one of my other brothers messing with him, snatched the blankets back and yelled, "Alex, stop doing that." And of course there was no response from Alex because he was fast asleep. My brother was laying on his side, keep in mind, and said he felt someone tug at his toes. He opened his eyes this time to see if it was Alex or one of the other boys, and to his surprise he saw a very dark figure staring back at him at the end of the bed near his feet. My brother, terrified, said he couldn't get a sound out of his mouth and continued to watch as this figure climbed on top of the bed and somewhat sat on him with a devilish grin, pinning him down. My brother froze in horror as he heard this figure say what he said sounded like,
"Maybe next time you'll listen to your mother."
After that, my brother said he seemed to have just kind of passed out. He woke a few moments later, confused and scared, and ran to my mom, who was sitting in the kitchen waiting for our dad to get home from work. He began to tell my mom the story, and to his amazement, my mother said she believed him and began to tell him. Moments after the boys had settled to fall asleep, in the corner of her eye she spotted a dark figure passing from living room to hallway, but thought it was nothing and passed it off as if her being tired from a long day, and was just seeing things. To their amazement, they found what appeared to be scratches on his back, arms, and one leading from his cheek down to the side of his mouth. My brother, horrified by what he experienced, never again talked back or stuck his tongue out at our mother in hopes that he would never experience that again. As you are sure aware of, as a little girl hearing this story, it certainly scared me, and then hearing it from my mom as well, you get the picture.
I was born and raised in the Philippines. We moved to the US when I was 11 years old. This story took place in the Philippines when I was 7 years old. I can recall some of the stuff that happened to me, but not to the fullest. My uncle retold the story again to me later on when I got a little older. And then from time to time, when we have family gatherings, someone in my family would retell the story again, as it was a bit mind-boggling. The story started when my dad and I went to visit his sister, my aunt, and my cousins in the province. My aunt has 3 children. One is my age and the other 2 are a couple of years older than I was. When we got to their house, I remember my aunt and cousins came running out of the house to greet us with such joy and excitement. After the initial visit, my cousins and I went outside to play hide and seek. My older cousin was the seeker while everyone else hid. My aunt's house was out in the woods. Her house was surrounded by mountains and trees after trees and tall grasses. There's this belief in the Philippines that most Duwendes live in the forest or a place where there's lots of trees. And if you cross their path, without saying, "Tabi tabi panuno," meaning, "Pardon or excuse me little people," they will cast a bad spell. It all depends on the Duwende you came across with. Some are nice and some are evil. If you cross an evil Duwende, he can cast a death wish on you. Some can give you warts all over your body and make you ugly and hideous, so people will be disgusted of you and don't want to be around you. Back to playing hide and seek. My cousin was the seeker and everyone hid. I wanted to hide where my cousin couldn't find me. So I saw this very big tree, what seemed to be 100-year-old tree. Around it, I found a little hole, and that's where I hid. Without thinking and forgetting what my elders told me about Duwendes, I forgot to say what we're supposed to say and hid for a long time in the tree. After what seemed to be forever hiding, I came out of the hole and went back to where my cousins were. They said that they have given up looking for me, since they didn't find me anywhere. That evening before dinner, I started not feeling too good. I remember the shivers, the many trips to the bathroom vomiting, and after that I can honestly say that I don't remember what else happened. But my dad and aunt told me that I was practically in a coma for 3 days. They said that in some cases, I was hallucinating. I would sweat heavily, laugh, cry, and sometimes I would talk to someone in front of me as if someone was there. But there was no one there. They even took me to a local hospital, but the doctors couldn't tell my family what was wrong with me. So my aunt asked her kids what we did outside. My cousins told my dad and aunt that all we did was play hide and seek. They said that I was gone a long time and that they couldn't find where I hid. My dad and aunt then knew that maybe I was a victim of an evil Duwende. They took me to an albulario, witch doctor, to find out what was wrong with me. As my dad explained to me, he said that as soon as they brought me inside the witch doctor's house, the witch doctor knew that I was being played or something evil was in my presence. The witch doctor lit a candle, took a tub and poured about 1 inch or 2 of water in it. Then she mixed a few drops of some special oil that comes from a plant with the water. While chanting in some weird language, she took the lit candle and poured the melted wax in the tub with the water and oil. As she poured the wax, a figure started to form. My uncle said that the melted wax on the water formed a huge tree with the hole. Inside the hole was a human, which was supposed to be me, and around me was about 4 or 5 Duwendes. Some were just standing there staring at me, and some looked like they were throwing something at me. So the witch doctor had advised my family to take me back where that big tree was and to say, "Tabi tabi panuno," and bring some fruits for offerings. That same day, my dad and aunt took me to the tree and excused me from any wrongdoings and brought with them plenty of fruits. All I remember was waking up the next day without any recollections of what had happened to me.
My father told me this story a few years ago about when he was younger. They lived in Waco, Texas at the time, out in the country. He told me about this pet pig he had out on the farm that his parents had. I would say he was about 14 or 15 at this time. He would tell me that he would come home and feed the pig and hang out with him in the barn area all day. He would even lay his head on its belly and they would both fall asleep for a few hours. This was when the pig was big but not a full adult. I have seen how big pigs can get, and that would be scary to lay so close, let alone the stench and rough hair. About 3 years later, my dad got home and couldn't find his pet anymore. He waited for his dad to get home to ask him where he was. His dad told him that he had to kill him to put some food on the table. My dad was mad and could not face the fact of it all. For the next few days, my dad told me he wouldn't eat or speak to his dad. One afternoon, when my dad was just about to enter the driveway, he looked over to where the pig feeder was and saw his pig. He was pretty excited about it but knew his dad killed it. As he walked up to it, the closer he got to it, he realized strange things. The pig never looked up at him as it ate. It was eating like it hadn't eaten in years. When he got close enough, he saw that the eyes were staring at him and they were dark red like bloodshot. The hair looked like it was burnt. He stopped in shock, thinking it was going to charge at him at any minute. He then looked at the rest of the body to see that its back hooves were that of a horse. He didn't know what to think but felt like his heart stopped. He turned away toward the house. He told me he felt like he was running but wasn't. He never told his dad anything because of how strict he was. He would have gotten in trouble telling him something like that. A few months later, on a night they were all supposed to go to church, my dad told his parents that he wanted to stay because he wasn't feeling good. My grandpa said it was fine as long as he kept the old shotgun near him. He said okay and they left. After watching TV for a few hours, my dad then laid back on the recliner with the gun beside him. He fell asleep. He was awoken by a strange feeling. He told me that he felt really druggy, like he was still asleep. Kinda like when you're so tired and you get up to do something then fall back asleep. Then the next morning you thought you were dreaming that. Kind of like that feeling. He then continued to tell me that when he woke up he listened for something. He didn't know what, but he was keeping real still and probably not breathing. The TV was already off and the fan was still going but gently. He then heard in the distance a pig. But he had no pig. He said his heart started beating real quick and out of control as if he was having a panic attack. Just a few seconds later he heard a knocking noise in the coat closet next to the front door, just about 10 feet from where he was. He was scared but managed to fall asleep with the TV on about an hour later. He remembered that he was having a bad dream. Like he couldn't breathe. He struggled to breathe but couldn't. He then opened his eyes. He told me that there on his chest was a small human creature thing looking at him right in the eyes. The face all mangled up with a look of confusion on it. My dad jumped up, pushing the entity off like someone shrugging a spider or something off of them. He then reached for his gun while the creature ran away like a chimp would back towards the closet. My dad already had his gun to his shoulders, aiming for a good shot, but remembered that he was shaky. Right when the door closed, he fired a shot, hitting the wall and the closet door at the same time. He said that the gun he had could have blown someone's head clean off from where he was standing. He left the house until his parents got there from church. He had a lot of explaining to do about what happened. That's all I know of the story. But I do believe in what he told me because he wouldn't lie about something like that. Many of you pass my stories as lies, but I can assure you that with everything that has happened with my family in the past generation, and with me now, I can believe something like that. But I do understand your thoughts and opinions, for we are free to make our own judgments. It's hard to believe something if it sounds strange.
Now, I just want to say that I'm not very new to the supernatural. I've been having the paranormal happen to me my whole life. When I was little, I used to have a companion that I referred to as the old man. It scared my mom badly when I would begin just to talk to him because she couldn't see him. From what I remember, he was a grandfather that had died, but that isn't the story I'm telling today. My mom divorced my dad when I was about 10 or 11 and we all just left our rental property. My mom and I moved into a condo near my school and we got a dog. That was the agreement I gave her. If we moved, I had to have a dog. So we got a beagle mix, and named her Holly. No, it wasn't Christmas time either, it just seemed like a good name. We took her home and everything was fine, for a while at least. We'd been living in the condo for about 2 weeks before we got the dog, and my mom had let me do most of the painting and stuff. So she was usually reading or something while I worked, I liked doing the flooring and painting, so it wasn't a big deal. But I started getting the feeling someone was watching me. I'd shut doors and cabinets just so I could work. I could hear scratching sounds behind me, and only when my mom left for work did the things get weirder. Things would go missing and turn up in completely random places, like a paint roller ending up in the toilet bowl. I would ignore these things because they weren't that bad. But then things got weird. My radio would turn off and I'd turn it back on, only to find as soon as I turned around it shut right back off. The painter's tape would disappear off the walls and be balled up in the corner of another room. I was creeped out, but I didn't tell my mom. When we got the dog, I figured whatever was bugging me would just leave me alone. It did, but it turned abusive towards my dog. Holly would be sitting on the floor and suddenly yelp. She watched things that weren't their pace around the room. One time I touched her while she was watching something and she gave a sort of half growl, half whimper. I remember that she'd suddenly have her collar, visibly pulled, she had a choke chain on for training, and she was dragged to her cage where she was locked in. I got fed up with this and told whatever it was to just leave the dog alone. It did. I figured I was done with it. But after a few weeks, I started seeing figures walking around the place. I would hear tapping sounds from other rooms. Mind you, even though the walls between my neighbors and I are soundproof, I would hear voices whispering. The constant feeling of being watched came back and stayed no matter how many times I would shut things. My hair would get pulled when I was watching TV, my cell phone would constantly end up in the refrigerator, and my bedroom door got in the habit of locking itself. Soon there would be scratches at my door and knocking sounds came from my closet. Snickering sounds came from the area around my nightstand. My homework would be thrown around the room when I woke up in the morning. Then it just got scary. I would get the feeling of weight on my chest and my sheet would get pulled off the bed even if I held onto it. When I stayed up late on the computer, I'd catch a glimpse of only what I can describe as an impish figure bobbing around. One night my door opened and shut and I looked out from under my sheet to see what was there. The imp thing was staring at the bed from a distance of about 3 feet. I swear it had almost a reddish hue, but I can't quite be sure. I would guess it was about 4 feet tall standing up, but it looked hunched over by age, I suppose. It had a pointy hat on, as ridiculous as that may sound. It simply walked over to the foot of my bed and started pulling at my sheets. I held on, but it was strong and started making hissing and spitting sounds. Then I felt the sensation of hitting on my legs. It was painful, and when it stopped I basically curled up in a ball to sleep. Now I could have simply played that night off as a bad dream. But I had bruises on my legs when I woke up. Furthermore, a chair by my desk was kicked over and my homework was scattered. I still get the feeling I'm being watched sometimes, but ever since we got new neighbors the occurrences have subsided. I'm guessing whatever it is like to haunt the newest residents, so I wasn't all that surprised when the people moved out, complaining of bad soundproofing, but the truth is, the soundproofing was brand new on their unit. When the next people moved in, I tried to give them a hint and they laughed it off. They moved out fast, too. In the end, the newest neighbors are hardly ever home. If you know what it is, please tell me. I'm curious as to why it doesn't just stay in one unit.
From what I can remember, it was never a scary house. From the outside it looked normal enough, a little one-story with a well-manicured lawn, fenced in the backyard and garage. It was owned by my mother's friend, who I lovingly called my aunt. As far as bad experiences go, I have none to recall prior to the day my aunt moved from the house. That day, however, is a different story. My aunt and her husband had been on the rocks for a while, and I assume much heartbreak and harsh words had gone down within the house during their stay there. Maybe that attracted the spirit, I will never know. I don't recall much about the day my aunt and mother packed up the house, but I do remember being asked to go into the spare bedroom and retrieve some blankets. Now, the spare bedroom was a little secluded room in the front of the house that was accessible only by going down a hallway that also doubled as the laundry room. The washer and dryer sat in a closet, and above them was a little door to the attic. When I say door, it wasn't so much a door, but more a piece of wood that sat on top of a square hole that opened up into the attic. I was far too little to reach this door, even if I was to stand on top of the washer and reach with my arms outstretched. It was impossible. You must remember that on this day it was only me, my mother, and my aunt who were at the house. So imagine my surprise when I walked past the laundry to find the closet doors had been opened with the attic door ajar and light on. I had been in and out of the house all day and knew that not one person had been into the attic. My mother detests attics and my aunt won't be caught dead climbing up into one, so I found this all to be a little strange. I continued on my way to the room where I gathered the blankets and then headed back into the hallway. As I was leaving, I looked up into the open attic, and there appeared a man. To this day his appearance has always baffled me, for he was not so much a man but an elf-like creature. He wore his hair long and over it was a pointed hat. His clothes were tattered and I can remember them being green. His skin was brown and his eyes black. He was small, I don't want to say a midget for I mean to offend no one, and so for the sake of being politically correct I will just say that he was no taller than 3 feet. He was not a lean creature and was actually quite round about the middle. He sat hunched over the square opening of the attic looking down at me with a malicious grin. I froze.
"Come here, little girl,"
he said. To which I did not respond.
"Little girl, come up here,"
he said again. His voice I remember was a harsh one, high-pitched, but at the same time deep and threatening. Even as a child I knew that what I was seeing was not human, and it was not good. I stood there in a sort of paralyzed state staring at this thing in the attic for what seemed like an eternity while he again and again repeated, "Come here, little girl, come up here, little girl." Then, as if my brain was finally able to get through to my feet, I ran. I believe I would have run through a wall of linebackers to get out of that house. I could hear him laughing as I took off, a dangerous laugh, one that to this day will raise the hairs on my arms and neck. Immediately I told my mother and aunt what I had experienced and they just as immediately wrote me off as having an overactive imagination. After much pleading I got them into the hallway, where lo and behold, the attic door was open and light still on. The little man I had described to my mother and aunt had vanished. It was obvious that I was not the one to have done this, being that I was not of the right height to even reach the door, let alone the light inside, which hung another 3 feet above the opening. Needless to say, the packing was left unfinished and the 3 of us promptly left the house with a phone call to my aunt's ex, informing him he could finish emptying the house himself. Whether my mother and aunt believed my story, or thought that a crazy person had taken residence in the attic, I don't know. I was never, and to this day am not the type to make up wild stories. I am a very grounded person, but I know that what I encountered that day was a spirit, demon, or ghost, and it was evil, very evil. Why it had never showed itself until then I can't say, but it came to me and has been a part of my memory ever since. It was my first and only experience with actually seeing an entity. I still get feelings of being watched and I can always sense when I am not alone, but have never again seen anything. If anyone has had an experience with these elf-like creatures, I would like to know about it. I alone can't be the only one in this vast world that has had an encounter with one of these guys.
This incident happened to my husband a long time ago before he met me. He gave me permission to share with you. His story is unusual for him because Ramon is from a small city in Nicaragua and grew up hearing stories about supernatural beings such as Chupacabra and La Llorona. However, with a civil war going on around him, he became very aware of danger from living people and less concerned with the otherworldly. As a result, he generally gives little thought to the supernatural. During the summer breaks at college, he would work his stepfather's land in the north of the country, tending the animals and mending fences. He enjoyed the physical work and the extra cash he earned for the upcoming semester. One evening, just after sunset, he was finishing up some work alone and gathering up his tools to go back to the house when, from the darkness of trees and brush, a white dog emerged, wagging its tail and walking up to Ramon. The dog acted happy and playful. It was a medium-sized dog, nothing remarkable about it except its color, which in the glow of Ramon's light seemed to be all white. Ramon, an animal lover, patted the dog on the head, roughed up its fur along its back, and then found a small stick to toss for it. As the dog trotted for the stick that lay about 30 feet away in the dirt, Ramon noticed that even though the dog was walking away from him, it seemed to be growing in size. By the time the dog reached the stick, it looked to be at least a foot or two taller, larger than a greyhound, about the size of a small donkey. The dog happily returned with the stick, wagging its tail and with a playful demeanor, seeming to shrink as it approached him and was normal-sized again. Ramon felt something strange was definitely going on, so he gestured to the dog to get away and told him to get out of there, to go home. The dog trotted back into the darkness, growing in size again, but soon was out of sight. When Ramon returned to the house, he asked the other farm hands if anyone had a white dog, saying it was running loose on the property. The farm hands said that no one had a light-colored dog, at least no one they knew, and no one had seen a loose dog. He told them about his encounter. They said that it sounds like he was blessed with a visit from the Cadejo. In Nicaragua, a white Cadejo is considered good luck, or at least a neutral encounter. A black Cadejo is bad luck, and may even attack you and hurt or kill you. Sometimes Cadejos are described as having horns or other non-canine features. Ramon saw no horns, but has no explanation on how the animal could change in size so obviously. Ramon thinks that what he saw on his stepdad's land was a Cadejo, that he knew in his gut this was no normal dog. He was out on the property, far from anything reflective that would skew his perspective. He did make inquiries with neighbors about dogs that could match the description, but no one came forward with any known dog of that coloring in the area. He's just grateful it was a white Cadejo.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.